اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
السلام عليكم. السلام عليكم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. All praises on Allah's Lord of the worlds, and may His peace and blessings be upon our Master, the Holy Prophet Muhammad, and His pure Immaculate Act. In spiritual wayfaring, say Rasool, the traveler is the I, the immaterial rational spirit. And this immaterial rational spirit, by essence, always needs to be in association with a body. In this world, it's the physical body. Without a physical body, the I can't spiritually elevate itself in this world. In Barzakh, it's an association with the Mithali soul. And we spoke somewhat on the Mithali soul both yesterday and the day before. Now the questions I want to touch upon tonight are the following. Can the I elevate spiritually in Barzakh in the same way that it can elevate spiritually, has the potential to elevate in this world? Can it spiritually elevate itself after physical death in Barzakh? Is there room for further development in Barzakh, or are all chances of spiritual elevation, do they end on death? Is the I, the immaterial rational spirit, is it stagnant in Barzakh? And if so, does this stagnancy qualify to the majority of people or a minority, and why? Or is there dynamicity, spiritual dynamicity in Barzakh? And if so, how can one acquire this spiritual dynamicity in Barzakh? Okay, now to answer these questions, I'll be going through, not in any particular detail, but I'll first touch upon Allama Tabataba'i's view very quickly. Then for the major part of the discussion, I'm going to touch upon Allama Hasanzade's view, which goes against Allama Tabataba'i's view. And then at the end, I'm going to touch upon the late Ayatollah Sa'adat Parvar's view, which is the most perfect view amongst the three. Now, when I give the third perspective, then inshallah tomorrow we'll explore this third perspective. But there's a very delicate point in this third perspective. You just have to pay attention a bit so you don't lose the gist of the argument. Okay. There are some who believe that there is no spiritual elevation in Barzakh, because they say that spiritual elevation, spiritual evolution requires matter. And the Mithali soul, which is the subject matter in Barzakh, is immaterial. So there can be no spiritual elevation in Barzakh. Ayatollah Hasanzadeh Amari goes against this view. And he says that we must abide by the texts, whatever the texts, the Quran and the tradition say. Philosophically, you may not be able to prove that there is spiritual elevation of an immaterial entity However, we have traditions that point to this reality, that there is place for spiritual elevation with respect to the mithali soul in Barzakh. And he writes, Ayatollah Hassanzadeh, from the logic of the traditions, one may extrapolate that on accomplishing good deeds, we're building a scaffolding of virtue for ourselves. And assuming this scaffolding remains intact, i.e. we don't sin, it will be conveyed to the founder, the doer of those actions, in the hereafter. And this is tantamount to spiritual elevation, albeit on a different realm. Then Ayatollah Hassanzadeh gives a number of traditions which he believes implies that there is spiritual elevation in Barzakh and that it doesn't end on death. We're going to go through these traditions one by one, and then I'll give the third perspective at the end. There's a tradition that states, ست خصال ينتفع بها المؤمن من بعد موته. There are 6 features, 6 characteristics, or 6 things that the mu'min, that the believer after death, and he's in Barzakh after death, that after death the believer will still benefit from. And this benefit is tantamount to spiritual elevation according to Ayatollah Hassanzadeh. There are 6 things that the believer who's passed away and is in Barzakh now can still benefit from spiritually. The first, وَلَدٌ صَالِحٌ مُسْتَغْفِرٌ لَهُ. Righteous offspring that seek forgiveness of their parents. If someone passes away, for example your father, your mother, and you as a righteous offspring truly, wholeheartedly seek forgiveness for your parents, this will benefit your parents in the hereafter. The second, وَمُصْحَفٌ يُقْرَأُ فِيهِ. Books that are used and read by people and that benefits people, this will benefit the author of the book once the author passes away. Thirdly, قَلِيبٌ يَحْفُرُ. Wells that are drilled and lead to benefit for a community. غَرْسٌ يَغْرُسُ. Seeds that are planted that become trees and vegetation and that will benefit people. The planter of the seeds will, albeit he or her or she having passed away, that resulting vegetation, those trees that resulted as a consequence of his or her planting the seeds, this will benefit the dead in the hereafter. It's an action which he did in this world, but he'll benefit from it in Barzakh. Fifth, صدقة ماء يجري. One who provides a kind of waterworks, water supply for a given people. They will benefit in Barzakh for what they have done. And finally, the sixth, sunnatun hasana yu'khadhu biha ba'da. If one sponsors, pioneers, is the founder of a decent custom, this will benefit that person in Barzakh. For example, you give $1,000 for the building of a mosque, for the building of a hospital, orphanage. As long as the mosque, with all its activities, as long as the hospital, with all its activities, as long as the orphanage is in place and is functioning, the deceased will receive benefit in Barzakh as a consequence of finding or pioneering that project, whatever it may be. Now this tradition only mentions 6 things. Now it's not confined to these 6. You can think of numerous other examples which lead to benefiting a community and the deceased benefiting from that as a result. So it's not confined to these 6. Although on the margin, allow me to say that on the other side of the spectrum, if people pioneer bad deeds or the pioneers of bad projects where their evil still has an effect through a given community, in Barzakh they will suffer the reverse. But I don't want to talk about that. My discussion is spiritual elevation in Barzakh. Is it possible or not? Ayatollah Hassan Zadeh say, with this tradition, it shows, since we're benefiting the actions of the deceased when he was alive in this world, is benefiting him in Barzakh, this means there is spiritual elevation in Barzakh. So the logic of the traditions dictate that whoever executes virtuous deeds or sponsors virtuous deeds that lead to a person's or a community's benefit, assuming this is done for Allah's sake, to acquire Allah's pleasure, that deceased person will benefit in the hereafter. And this benefit is tantamount to spiritual elevation in the hereafter, in Barzakh, according to Ayatollah Hassan Zadeh. Note that I said if one does it for Allah's sake. There are many people who build hospitals, orphanages, and many other things, but not for Allah's sake. They do it for worldly reasons, and that's okay. That's okay, but on death, they won't receive any benefit. Only that which is done for Allah's sake will lead to benefiting. Okay. There are a number of traditions that we have that state that if a living person prays, if a living person fasts, or performs the Hajj pilgrimage on behalf of a deceased person, the traditions say that its reward will assist the deceased person, and the rewards will reach the deceased person. And according to Ayatollah Hassan Zadeh, this is tantamount for that deceased person. Since he's receiving rewards, it's tantamount to spiritual elevation. So we have 2 people, X and Y. X is living, Y is dead. X prays for Y. X fasts on behalf of Y. X goes to Hajj on behalf of Y. The traditions say that X's actions will lead to reward that will reach Y. And this is a form of spiritual elevation according to Ayatollah Hassan Zadeh. Now a question may arise here, and the question is this. X did the praying, the living person. X did the fasting. X went to Hajj. How can Y benefit from X's actions? Why should it lead to Y's spiritual development when X is doing the action? The scholars give 2 replies here. The first response is that yes, X is doing the action and X will primarily benefit by those actions. X is the main traveler here spiritually, and X will receive most of the benefit. But a radiance, a light emanating from X's actions will reach its destination, and that's Y, who is dead. Most of the reward will be attributed to X, the living person, but some will reach Y. For example, the traditions say that if X executes the Hajj pilgrimage on behalf of Y, the rewards, if we divide it into 70 parts, 69 parts will reach X, the living person, and only 1 part will be given to Y. So X is the primary benefiter here. But the question is this, and this is the second reply, that imagine X and Y are both alive. Okay, they're both alive. In the same way that giving presents to living people is rational and decent, giving presents to the deceased is also rational and decent. In the same way that donating presents to the living, a living person donates a present to a living person, another living person, well, in the same way that this makes the receiver happy, donating presents to the dead will make them happy. But when you give presents to the dead, their source of delight, their becoming happy, is much more than when a living person receives a present. Why? Their actions in this world may have confined them, is imprisoning them in Barzakh, is tormenting them in Barzakh. They're having a hard time in Barzakh. They're drowning in Barzakh. They're being pressurized in Barzakh. They're in much more need of presence. They become much more happier when we donate to them. Now, supporting what I've just said are 2 traditions. Although, before I give the 2 traditions, I'll just give one other tradition where, just to prove my point that the dead are much more needier in relation to presence, there's a holy tradition that states, Man amila min al-muslimin an mayyitin amalan saliha. Whenever a Muslim commits an action, executes an action on behalf of a mayyit, a deceased person, he commits and he does a righteous action on behalf of the mayyit, the deceased. Ud'ifa lahu ajruhu. That living person, his or her rewards will be doubled. Wa nafa Allahu bihil mayyit. And Allah will also grant benefit to the deceased. But the 2 traditions I want to now state, which demonstrate and illustrate the degree of severe need that the deceased have in relation to us, is this. In one tradition, the Holy Prophet of Islam, sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajil farajahum, states, the deceased is like the living person who is in the process of drowning and who is constantly anticipating any thread of assistance. He becomes delighted from others' supplications. It's as if they're drowning. A living person who drowns, how they're so in need, that's the status quo. That's the spiritual status quo of the dead in Barzakh. Imam Sadiq alayhi salam said, إِنَّهُمْ يَأْنِسُونَ بِكُمْ فَإِذَا قِبْتُمْ أَنْهُمْ إِسْتَوْهَشُوا. The dead acquire this affinity with you, the living. And once you're absent, for example, when you go to the grave, they develop this affinity with you. Once you depart, with your absence, they become very frightful. So this also shows their need on us. They're dependent on us to some degree. Another holy tradition which explains this utter need on behalf of the Mayyit is this. مر النبي بقبر دفن فيه بالأمس إنسان. The Holy Prophet of Islam was passing by a grave where the day before someone was buried. وَأَهْلُهُ يَبْكُونَ. When the Holy Prophet was passing, the family of the deceased, who was buried the day before, was beside the grave crying for the deceased. فَقَالَ, the Holy Prophet said, لِرَكْعَتَانِ خَفِيفَتَانِ مِمَّا تَحْتَغِرُونَ أَحَبُّ إِلَى صَاحِبِ هَذَا الْقَبْرِ مِنْ دُنْيَاكُمْ كُلِّهَا. The Holy Prophet of Islam said, 2 units of prayer, if you execute, to the woman who was crying, if you execute 2 units of prayer for the deceased, it's more valuable for the deceased than the value of the whole world, the value that the whole world has for you, the living person. This 2 units has so much value. Now, if these 2 units, the tradition ends there. Now, if these 2 units weren't of any benefit to the deceased, the Holy Prophet wouldn't have encouraged such a custom to be directed to the deceased. And Ayatollah Hassan Zahra says this benefit to the deceased is synonymous to spiritual elevation of the deceased. Concerning the delight that the deceased experience with respect to our supplications, the Holy Prophet of Islam said, Inna hadaya al-ahya lil amwat, verily the presents that the living give to the dead, ad-du'a wal istighfar. One is supplicating, the other is seeking forgiveness. These are the best presents you can give to your deceased, supplicating and istighfar. Now the Urafa, the Gnostics, have this hidden principle. They say if you want others not to forget you when you die, don't forget those that have passed away. Now, not forgetting people who have passed away, especially your loved ones, involves praying ad-du'a and doing istighfar, seeking forgiveness. But istighfar has many manifestations to it. We have a verbal istighfar, you saying astaghfirullah on behalf of the mayyit, and this is good. But there's a higher form of istighfar that you can do for the deceased. It's a practical form of istighfar, where you solve the deceased's debts. You solve their debts. You relieve their hardships. They may have caused some trouble amongst various elements in the community. You solve those troubles. You ask the deceased, the debtors of the deceased, to forgive them. You preserve the dignity of the deceased. These things, practical istighfar. Istighfar and dua are the best things you can do for the deceased. In the holy tradition, the Holy Prophet of Islam said, the most burdensome of nights is the first night. You should donate sadaqah, the Holy Prophet says, for your deceased member. And if you can't, at least pray 2 units for them. You should donate sadaqah for them on the first night. This probably is referring to a large sadaqah, Because then it says, if you can't pay sadaqah, pray 2 units. But everyone can pay at least, £1 of sadaqah. That's within everyone's means. So maybe it means a large, significant sadaqah. And if you can't pay the large, significant sadaqah, do 2 units of prayer. There's a tradition that the Holy Imam says, إِنَّ أَرْوَاحَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ يَأْتُونَ فِي كُلِّ لَيْلَةِ الْجُمُعَةِ. The spirits, the methali souls of the dead, they come in this world every Friday night. فَيَقُومُونَ بِفَنَاءِ بُيُوتِهِمْ. And they come at the doorsteps of their houses. They come to the doorsteps of the houses of their loved ones, their family members. Your deceased family members, the believers, inshallah, everyone, all of them are believers. They come to your doorstep in this world every Friday night or Friday Eve. ثم ينادى كل واحد منهم أو ينادي كل واحد منهم بصوت حزين. Then each one of them calls out with a voice of sorrow. They come to your houses and they call out, each spirit, with a voice of sorrow, a voice of grief. They say, Ya Ahli, O family members of mine, Wa Awladi, O offspring of mine, وَيَا أَقْرَبَائِي, O relatives of mine, اعتفوا علينا, have some compassion upon us, بِصَدَقَةٍ, by means of paying sadaqah, وَاذْكُرُونَا, recall me, recall us, وَارْحَمُوا عَلَيْنَا, show some mercy for us, في غربتنا وقلة حيلتنا, show some mercy for me in relation to my غربتنا, loneliness, and in relation to my lowliness. Show some mercy for me. Give sadaqah, do supplication on Friday Eve, pray, do istighfar, and so on and so forth. So the conclusion so far, the conclusion is that you, the living, can exert an effect on the deceased in barzakh. You can lead to a furthering of the methali soul in barzakh, the furthering of its spiritual elevation. So 2 things can lead to the dead's spiritual elevation in barzakh. One is the actions that he did in this world, which still are in function, like the hospital, the mosque, and so on and so forth. And the 6 things which I mentioned, and there may be many others. Or a source of spiritual elevation is you, the living, the family members, doing dua or istighfar and other things. This can also lead to spiritual elevation. Now, before continuing, I want to give 2 stories now, which show and demonstrate a form of spiritual elevation and spiritual freedom for the dead in barzakh. There were 2 scholars, living scholars, and they promised one another that whoever passes away first should come into the dream of the other who is living and to inform the other what's happening in barzakh. Because barzakh is synonymous to the world of our dreams. The I in our dreams is the methali soul. What happens is one of the scholars pass away, but never comes into the dream of the other scholar. Although you must take this story with a pinch of salt. I'm not saying this is 100% true, because dreams, we don't know exactly if they're true dreams and whether they can be interpreted and whether they can apply to us as a general principle and so on and so forth. Anyway, the scholar didn't come into the dream of the living scholar. And a year had passed. Then one night, the Mithali soul of the dead scholar did come into the dream of the living scholar. The living scholar in his dream said, "Why did you take such a long time? We promised one another that, you'll come immediately." The dead scholar said that my actions bound me, captivated me, imprisoned me. I wasn't free to travel in Barzakh. My actions kidnapped me. The scholar's negative actions. However, last night, a woman was buried in the cemetery where I was. And that woman was so holy that once she was buried, it had an effect on all the living spirits in that cemetery. And we were granted one day off. We were free for a day. And then the living scholar said, why was she so holy? The Mithali soul said, she executed ziyarat Ashura in a specific manner every day. So when she died in the spiritual grave, she was resurrected as pure light. And that light had some benefit for all the souls in that cemetery, and I was free for a day, so I came to you. That's one story. Now, I don't know the truth, but it's a story which is very common, and they give it on the pulpit usually. But the second story is more accurate. This story has been written by Sheikh Baha'i. And the person who narrated the story to Sheikh Baha'i, and that Sheikh Baha'i wrote it in one of his books, was a janitor, a caretaker in a cemetery in Isfahan. So the janitor, according to Sheikh Baha'i, is a very pious person and he doesn't lie. And Sheikh Baha'i says, this story is true because I know this man, he's not a liar. And the story is this, that one day the caretaker of the cemetery, they buried someone in the grave. And then on the same day, the caretaker of the cemetery, the Isfahani, saw a very angelic figure, a very illuminating figure, walk towards that grave which was buried that day. And there was this heavenly odor in the cemetery that the janitor said, I've never smelled such an odor. So he was looking at the figure, and the figure was walking and went in the grave. A moment later, a vicious dog was observed by the caretaker of the cemetery. And again, the janitor was seeing everything, and the dog entered the grave. Now, the dog wasn't a physical dog, or that angelic figure wasn't a physical bodily figure, physical figure. They were immaterial realities, mithali souls. Immaterial realities, yes. But they have color, shape, size. Anyway, so an angelic figure went in the grave. Then a dog entered the grave. Then after a while, the angelic figure exited the grave injured. He was injured all over. The dog had caused trauma to that angelic figure. Now the caretaker couldn't take this anymore. I mean, this is, what on earth is happening here? So he approached the angelic figure when the angelic figure was to exit. Here the caretaker is witnessing the realm of Barzakh, because Barzakh is here. Barzakh is the hidden realm of this world. But it's not open to our eyes. But some people can see this realm. Approached the figure and said, what's happening here? We buried this man. You first go in, then I saw a dog follow you, and now you come out? The angelic figure, who was now all injured, said this, that I was a manifestation of that man's salat, of the manifestation of a good action of that man. The dog was a manifestation of the man's bad actions. If you recall, yesterday we spoke about tajassumul a'mal. However, I was conquered by the dog in the grave, i.e. bad actions conquered, predominated over the good actions of the man. And I left. Now what remains with that man is vice, the manifestation, the resurrection, the embodiment of vicious actions, which will lead to the pressure of the grave. So that was another story. Now, so, in Barzakh, and we said this last night, it's only us and our malakat. Those ingrained dispositions that we acquired in this world will be embodied in Barzakh. وَلَهُمْ فِيهَا أَزْوَاجٌ مُطَهَّرَةٌ وَهُمْ فِيهَا خَالِدُونَ. And for them in heaven are pure azwaj, and they'll remain there forever in heaven. Some translations of the Quran translate azwaj as spouses, and for them in heaven are azwajun mutahhara, pure spouses, and they'll remain in heaven forever. Ayatollah Hassan Zadeh goes against this translation. It has nothing to do with women, azwaj. Spouse in Arabic is zawjah. The plural of zawjah is zawjat. It's not azwaj. Azwaj is the plural for zawj, and zawj means friend. In heaven, you'll be with pure friends, and they'll be with you forever. You'll remain forever in heaven with your pure friends. This friend is that embodied resurrection of your actions. And we have traditions on this, where the Holy Prophet says, you're building friends for your barzakh and for your heaven. Make sure they're good friends, they're pure friends. Let them be true manifestations of good actions. Don't make enemies for yourself in barzakh. Because if you have vicious, ingrained dispositions within you, that will manifest and resurrect as evil, as a dog, and so on and so forth. Okay. Now, I slowly want to enter this third perspective. Before I start the third perspective, just one very brief introduction. That in our du'as, supplications, in many traditions of the Holy Quran, many traditions of the Ahlul Bayt and verses of the Holy Quran, in our Sharia, we're always invited to travel inwards and to disassociate from everything outside. That doesn't mean to be isolated from the outside, but disassociate oneself from the outside and only travel inwards. Sure, yes, no problem, yes. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajjal.
So there's a goldish, silverish, E-class Mercedes. It has to be moved or else the person will tow it. trying to tow it right now. So if you
What,
guys can take
yes.
care of it.
What's the car, yes?
Goldish silver. I'm very sorry.
No,
about this.
not
Just
at all. No.
because we don't want to
أصلا لا إيش قلنا؟
very much.
لا أخو أستغفر الله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Everything in our religious resources invites the person to travel within and to disassociate from everything outside. I'll explain more about this in the future, inshallah. We have a tradition that states, Kun finnas, wala takun ma'ahum. Be with the people, be with them. We're designed as social animals. Our fitra is that of a social fitra. Be with the people. You have to be with the people. You can't isolate yourself. Isolating oneself from society, from people, can be a source of deviation. The son of Prophet Noah alayhi salam, the reason why he didn't follow his father's path was that of isolating himself from the people. وَكَانَ فِي مَعْزَلٍ, and he was standing aloof. When everyone was in the ark, and the ark was rising with the storms and everything, the son was standing aloof. Now, the external meaning is that the son was standing outside the ark, away on the mountain, not in the ark. But the esoteric dimension, according to Imam Khomeini, he says it may be referring to this reality. وَكَانَ فِي مَعْزَلٍ, he was always isolated from the people. And that led to deviation. He never accepted his father's path, and he faced the consequences. Anyway, kun finnas, be with the people. وَلَا تَكُنْ مَعَهُمْ, but don't be with them. Kun finnas, be amongst the people. وَلَا تَكُنْ مَعَهُمْ, but don't be with them. Ma'ahum. Ma'a means with. Here the Urafa, when you see ma'a in the Quran, it means acquiring the color of the people, the spirit of the people, the traits, the characteristics of the people. Be with the people, but don't acquire their characteristics. Don't acquire their vicious attributes. But you have to be with them. Islam is anti-hermetism. Islam is anti-monasticism. Islam doesn't agree with living a life of total isolation. You have to live with the people, but don't be with them. Don't acquire their traits. You travel inwards. Disassociate from all else. Socialize with them, be with them, but disassociate yourself. You have to travel inwards, not outwards. Don't attach yourself to whatever's outside. Your journey must always be internal, never external. The outside just distracts you, and we'll speak more about this later. Now that was just a small introduction to this third perspective. Now the point is this. In some traditions, not only do the traditions instruct us not to suffice with our heirs, H-E-I-R-S. These traditions, not only does it say that you should not suffice with your heirs, your spouse, children, parents, when you pass away, those who inherit from you. Don't suffice with them. Not only does it say, don't suffice with your righteous legacies, Baqiyat al-Salihat. The traditions say, don't suffice with your inheritors. In Arabic, heir is warith. I'll be saying warith from now. I mean the inheritor. I mean the heir to someone. One's children can be a source of, we mentioned in traditions, one's children, one's spouse, if they pray for you, they can be a source of your elevation. The traditions say, don't suffice with your heirs, with your waris. Don't suffice with your righteous legacies. You've built a hospital, you've built an orphanage, you've built a mosque. That's very good. As long as the mosque is there, the hospital is there, you will benefit in barzakh. But the traditions would say, don't suffice with your righteous legacies. With the buildings that you've made, the orphanages, the schools. Don't suffice with these. Disassociate from them. They have some benefit, but don't think that they will be sufficient. But rather, and much more importantly, designate, assign yourselves as your own heir, as your own waris. Be your own waris on death. Travel inwards. Don't suffice with your children, your spouse, that they will pray for you, they will do this, they will do that. Don't suffice with the buildings and the mosques and the hospitals that you've built. You should suffice with something much higher. You have to be your own waris, your own inheritor. Hospitals, okay, buildings, orphanages, and so on and so forth. Your family, your parents, your children, your spouse, these are all outside you. Don't attach to the outside. Don't depend on the outside. You have to travel inwards. You have to be your own waris. Righteous legacies, your inheritors, they can be of benefit to you in barzakh. But these traditions, and we'll explain why, they say be your own waris. Don't suffice with the outside. Disassociate from them. Travel inwards. So we must, according to these traditions, we must aim to disassociate from the outside, from those righteous legacies, baghiyat al-salihat, to such an extent. And we have to aim to internally explore ourselves inside to such an extent that you become your own heir, you become your own waris, and you don't attach to external waris, to external heirs, to external righteous legacies. Don't be dependent on good offspring. Don't be dependent that your righteous offspring will do something for you. It's good, it has some benefit. And there's no problem in having it. But the effect, and this we're slowly entering this third perspective by Ayatollah Sa'adat Parwar, who was a private student of Allama Tabatabai. I only saw him 3 times. When I went into his house, he was living on earth. Every time I would exit, I would sit on the floor with him. I was sitting on earth. There was no carpet, nothing. And every time I would leave the house, I had to, wipe, the dust off my trousers. He was an incredible man. And he never published his books. Only when he passed away, his books became published. We suddenly saw 100 volumes of books. Anyway, we're slowly entering his third perspective. Because he doesn't have the same perspective as Ayatollah Hasanzadeh, believing that the benefit that the righteous legacies have for the dead, he doesn't believe this is tantamount to spiritual elevation of the dead. He says there is benefit for the dead, but that doesn't mean spiritual elevation. External righteous legacies are good, but your potential is much more. With these external legacies, you're still confining yourself, you're still limiting yourself to the outside. You have to disassociate from the outside, you have to travel inside. You have to let go. You shouldn't attach to the outside. If you suffice with your warase, your warises, if you suffice with your righteous legacies, you won't be free to travel more and more within yourself. You'll receive some benefit, but it's very, very limited, this benefit. It's both limited, it's both minimal and temporary. First of all, your heirs will pass away one day. How many of you still supplicate for your great-great-great-grandmother? How many of none of you? Your heirs will pass away. They'll reach a time very quickly where you'll receive no dua, no supplication, no istighfar from anyone. It's a pity to attach yourself to external waris. It's minimal. There's some benefit, but it's minimal. And it's temporary. You build a hospital, that hospital one day will be demolished. One day, okay, after 100 years, 200 years, 300 years, it won't remain there forever. And even if it does, the benefit the hospital will give is limited. It won't lead to your spiritual elevation. Why? Because your elevation depends on your actions in this world. Whatever you acquire here in this world, you take with you. And I'll speak more on this soon, inshallah. So, if one does succeed to become one's own waris, the thing is this, that not only if you succeed to become your own waris on death, and I'll explain what being one's own waris is, inshallah, tomorrow. But if you succeed to be your own waris, you won't need external heirs anymore. You won't depend on external righteous legacies anymore. You won't need them. They'll be negligible in relation to what you've acquired if you succeed to be your own waris. Hospitals are good, righteous offspring are good, and they have some benefit. But the sustenance from those who become their own waris is much greater. Those who become their own waris can be a source of sustenance for the living even. Succeeding to be your own waris should never be underestimated. Who better than yourself to be your own waris? What do the living know of your condition in Barzakh? You're now in Barzakh. The living have no appreciation of what you're going through. The living have no understanding of what Barzakh is, of what the levels of Barzakh include. The living themselves may be drowned in sin. They're occupied with their worldly life. It's a pity to depend on them to be a source of benefit for you in Barzakh. But you can be your own waris. You can be your own inheritor. And by being that, you'll be independent from external heirs or external righteous legacies. Depending on external righteous legacies By doing so, you're confining yourself to external reward. You want internal reward. And that can be acquired by being your own waris. Because external rewards too are on the outside. You have to disassociate from that. You have to travel inwards. By being your own waris, the rewards aren't even comparable to the rewards that you will receive by the external heirs or the external righteous legacies. Now, what does all this mean in practical terms? You have to pay attention here. It's a very delicate point Ayatollah Saadat Parvar has mentioned, and it's this. But it will have some benefit, because the traditions say, يُنْتَفَعُ بِهَا الْمُؤْمِنِ. These righteous legacies will benefit the mu'min. It won't lead to the mu'min's spiritual elevation in barzakh, but it will benefit the mu'min in barzakh. And this is what benefit means. In this world, your actions, whatever they are, will be embodied in barzakh, will be resurrected, will be manifested. On barzakh, it all ends. Your actions become manifested now. Whatever you have acquired in this world, faith-wise, spirituality-wise, that's the level you will be in barzakh. If you acquired vicious attributes in this world, in barzakh you will be in one of the levels of hell in barzakh. If you acquired a high level of spirituality here in barzakh, you will be in one of the levels of heaven in barzakh. The benefit that prayers, supplication, dua, righteous legacies have is this: that if you're in one of the levels of heaven in barzakh, within that level, you will be given more provisions, heavenly provisions, on a par with that level. You won't rise to a higher level, but in accordance with that level you're in barzakh, you will be given more provisions that are in harmony with that level, but you won't rise to a high level in barzakh. And if you're in one of the levels of hell in barzakh, what your righteous legacies can do for you is to eliminate somewhat some of the hardships that you're undergoing in that level of hell in barzakh. This is what benefit to the mu'mineen, to Muslims who die, or to people who die. This is what benefit means, according to Ayatollah Saadat Parvar. It's not spiritual elevation. You can't spiritually elevate. You've acquired the level of Iman, you acquired it in this world, you'll be resurrected with in the hereafter, in barzakh, and you'll be at that level. You won't keep on rising to higher levels in barzakh. But you will benefit. You will be given more heavenly rewards if you are a good person. The difficulties and hardships, if you're in a bad place in barzakh, will be somewhat eliminated maybe. As long as the hospital that you helped build is curing cancer patients, is doing this, is doing that. As long as the schools you built are producing true people, and so on and so forth, and you're in hell in barzakh, some of the hardships, some of the burdens will be facilitated for you as a result of your actions in this world. There's going to be no more improvement, no more elevation with respect to one's faith and spirituality. The only improvement there is in relation to those provisions if you're in the heaven of barzakh, or the elimination of hardships if you're in the hell of barzakh. But there'll be no elevation with respect to your soul. To acquire this latter improvement, to be able to spiritually elevate yourself in barzakh, You have to be your own waris. If you become your own waris, then you can spiritually elevate in barzakh. Higher and higher. Go to higher and higher levels in barzakh. That's possible. But you have to be your own waris. And that you have to acquire in this world. Only then, spiritual elevation, only then is possible. Otherwise, benefit from the external legacies and the external heirs is what I explained. That improvement or the elimination of hardships. The waris, those external heirs or the external righteous legacies, the scope of action they have is limited to the acquired faith that the deceased acquired in this world. But if you become your own waris, there'll be no limitations in barzakh. You just keep on growing, developing. Now look at this dua from the Holy Prophet, which is attributed to be read on the eve of the 15th of Sha'ban. You can find this in Mafatih, where the Holy Prophet said, Allahumma. You have to pay very close attention. I'm just going to read it here, and tomorrow we're going to explore this. This is just a proof and evidence of what I'm saying, that we should be our own waris if there's hope for spiritual elevation in barzakh. Allahumma amti'na bi'asma'ina wa absarina wa quwwatina ma ahyaytana. O Allah, make us benefit by means of our hearing, by means of our seeing, and by means of our other powers, in such a manner that you grant us life. The person who recites the dua is living. He or she is already living. And asking Allah to make me benefit, O Allah, by means of my hearing, by means of my seeing, and other powers. But hearing and seeing are the most important. Ma ahyaytana, in a way that you grant me life. Now this life has a specific definition. Waj'alhu warithan minna, and assign this life as our waris. We have to be our own waris, not depend on the external heirs, on the external righteous legacies. And we can be our own waris if this life, which is referring to Hayaat al-Tayyibah, the good life, the pure life, which we'll explore more tomorrow. If you acquire the good life, Hayaat al-Tayyibah, the pure life, by means of properly using your hearing and seeing, that good life which you acquire can be your waris. You can be your own waris in the hereafter. And that can be a source of you spiritually elevating in the hereafter. This seeing and hearing isn't you not seeing haram things or not hearing backbiting. No, that's taqwa. Hayaat al-Tayyibah is much more. It's a perfection. Taqwa isn't a perfection per se. It's a preliminary step to perfection. Most people with taqwa will be limited in barzakh. They'll be confined in barzakh. They won't be able to spiritually elevate in barzakh. Most people with taqwa. Taqwa is the minimum we must acquire. This using of our ears and seeing is a specific kind of hearing and seeing, which we'll explore tomorrow. And by doing so, then Allah will grant us life. Ma ahyaytana. If that life is granted, waj'alhu, assign that life as our waris. So inshallah tomorrow we'll explore what this Hayaat al-Tayyibah is, how to acquire it so we can be our own waris and disassociate ourselves from the external heirs, the external righteous legacies, the Baqiyat al-Salihat, not to limit ourselves. We're worth much more than this. The benefit from Baqiyat al-Salihat is both minimal and temporary. But this is everlasting, as long as it's granted to us, this Hayaat al-Tayyibah. Wa sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ala ta'ala.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد اللهم صل على